Episode 1: The Marionette's Last Dance. They say every puppeteer leaves a little piece of himself in his work. A fleck of the wrist, a breath, a heartbeat. But sometimes, the strings remember more than they should. This story comes from a small coastal town in Maine, where an old puppeteer named Arthur Vail performed his final show. For 50 years, Arthur's marionettes had danced, bowed, and bled laughter across generations. But now, his hands shook too much to tie new strings. He announced one last performance, a farewell to the stage he built with his own hands. It was held in the town's century-old theater. The curtains were tattered, the seats half broken, but every chair was filled that night. Old faces from the town came to see him off. Some brought children. Some brought the same wonder they'd had decades ago. Arthur's marionettes hung quietly behind the curtain, hand-carved from birchwood, polished smooth by years of touch. There was Lydia, the dancer in red silk, Jonas, the sailor with glass eyes, and the boy in the mask, a nameless puppet that Arthur never performed with in public. He called it the Silent One. When the show began, the air turned still. Arthur's voice cracked as he greeted the audience. He pulled the first string, and Lydia bowed gracefully under the spotlight. Her silk dress shimmered. The crowd gasped. It was as if the years had never passed. But something felt wrong. The strings didn't seem to move. They pulled back. Lydia's head turned too smoothly, too freely. And when Arthur let go of the crossbar to rest his trembling hand, the marionette kept dancing. At first the crowd laughed, thinking it was part of the act. But Arthur froze. He hadn't attached the safety wire that could allow her to move alone. He took a step back. The puppet turned its head toward him, and in a soft, creaking voice that hadn't come from any speaker, it said, "Arthur, or should I say, Eli Vail." The audience murmured, confused. Arthur's heart stopped. That name, Eli Vail, was his birth name. The one he'd abandoned after a fire decades ago took his first troop and his wife. No one alive should have known it. The puppet's head tilted. Its eyes rolled toward the wings of the stage, and the other marionettes began to twitch. Jonas lifted his arm. The Silent One turned its mask toward the light. One by one they stepped off their hooks, wood creaking, joints clicking softly. Arthur stumbled backward, pulling at the strings, but the cords were no longer attached to the crossbar. They were buried deep in the wood floor, vanishing beneath the stage. The audience began to whisper. Someone laughed nervously. Then, every puppet spoke at once. "Dance with us, Eli. You promised us one last show." Arthur's cane fell from his hand. He tried to run, but the marionettes surrounded him, their strings snaring around his wrists, his ankles, his throat. Their carved faces smiled under the flickering lights. And then, he danced. Not gracefully, but violently, jerking, twisting, as if his body itself had become a puppet. The crowd screamed. Some said the strings were cutting into his skin. Others swore they saw his mouth move, but not his words. The sound came from all around them, from the wood, from the curtains, from the air. "One last show," they whispered. "You owe us that much." When the curtain finally dropped, the stage was empty. Arthur Vail was gone. All that remained was the crossbar, dangling in midair, its strings pulled tight, leading down into the floorboards. The police later found nothing beneath the stage. No body, no blood, just a faint smell of varnish. And one new puppet hanging from the rafters, a wooden figure with trembling hands and eyes carved wide open. Its tag read, "Eli Vail, the Puppeteer." If you ever see an old marionette dancing by itself, don't watch too long, because the longer you look, the tighter the strings pull. Episode 2. The Mirror Lake. They call it Mirror Lake because on still nights, the water doesn't just reflect you, it remembers you. This story comes from a town that doesn't exist on any current map. A town swallowed by forest and time, left to rot after the mines closed. But the lake remained. Locals say it was once a quarry, filled with rain and runoff after an explosion in 1932. They say the water was too clear, so still it looked like glass. And sometimes, if you leaned too close, you could see something beneath your reflection. Not the bottom, not fish. Something else. Something waiting. The first report I found came from a teenager named Mara Linton back in 1987. She'd been walking her dog near the lake around midnight. She said she heard someone calling her name. Not an echo, not quite. It was her own voice, coming from across the water. At first she thought it was a prank, but the voice called again, softer this time. "Mara, please help me." Her dog began to growl, staring into the water. Mara said she leaned over the edge with her flashlight and saw herself, not the reflection. Another her, just under the surface. Her eyes were open, and she was mouthing something. When Mara screamed, the figure mimicked her, but a second later, like a delay in a recording. And then the water broke. The next morning they found her flashlight on the rocks and the leash still wrapped around her wrist. But no Mara. No body ever surfaced. 2 years later, another boy, Aaron Dale, vanished in the same spot. His friends said he'd been skipping stones, laughing, when suddenly he froze. He said, "Do you hear that?" They didn't, but Aaron began to walk toward the water, murmuring, "It sounds like me, but not me." He stepped in. The water never rippled. Over the next 3 decades, Mirror Lake became a ghost story parents told to keep kids away. But I went there last summer because I'd found something strange, a recording. It was labeled Mara Side B, an old cassette found in an abandoned ranger cabin near the lake. I played it. The first sound was static, then a girl's voice, trembling, whispering, "It's not a reflection. It's a door, and once it opens, it doesn't close from this side." Then silence, and faintly after a minute, a second voice, lower, wet, gurgling, "Archivist." The tape snapped. I went to the lake at dusk. The surface was like glass, perfectly smooth, perfectly still. I said my name out loud, just once to test the echo. No response. But then, a moment later, the air shifted. The water moved. And I heard it, my own voice, coming back to me from beneath. "You're late." The light dimmed. Something touched my boot from below. I took one step back, and the reflection didn't move. It stayed staring at me, smiling, with its mouth still underwater. I ran. Didn't look back until the forest swallowed the view. But when I listened to my recorder later that night, there was something on the tape I hadn't said. A whisper, faint, wet, too familiar. "Next time, bring a light." We're waiting. If you ever find yourself near a lake so still it looks like a mirror, don't say your name. Don't lean too close. Because sometimes the reflection you see isn't waiting to copy you. It's waiting to trade places. Episode 3, The Clockmaker's Guest. There's a saying among old watchmakers, a clock only stops when something wants it to. This story begins in a quiet little town called Briar Hollow, where every street corner still held an old shop from another time. And at the center stood the Marin Clockworks, a narrow brick front store filled with hundreds of clocks. Cuckoo clocks, carriage clocks, grandfather clocks, each one still ticking in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat made of brass and memory. The owner, Henry Marin, was the last of his kind, a clockmaker born into a family of clockmakers. He was 78 when I met him, thin as a gear spring, his fingers stained with oil and age. He told me he was closing the shop next month, after the guest leaves, he said. I thought he was joking, until he told me about the clock. It was a tall, ornate grandfather clock built by his father in 1954, a masterpiece of craftsmanship, dark walnut, gold pendulum, hand-painted face. But Henry said it was wrong because it kept perfect time, even when it wasn't wound. He said every night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the clock would start ticking on its own. No matter how many times he stopped it, no matter if he removed the weights, it would begin again. Tick, tock, tick, tock, and then a soft knock at the door. No one was ever there, just the sound, 3 slow knocks, and then silence, except for the clock counting the seconds until morning. Henry told me it started the night his father died. He'd been alone in the shop, fixing a broken carriage clock, when he heard footsteps downstairs. He called out, thinking maybe a customer had come late, but the only answer was the chime of the grandfather clock, ringing 13 times. 13 at 2:13, every night since. He tried selling it once, but the buyer returned it within a week, pale and trembling. Said he woke to the sound of someone winding the clock beside his bed, and when he looked, the pendulum had stopped swinging, but his reflection in the glass still moved. Henry said the clock was waiting for someone. The guest, he called it. Every clock keeps time for someone. This one's keeping time for him. When I visited the shop, it was dusk. The air smelled of dust, brass, and rain. Every clock ticked softly, except one. The grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its pendulum still, its hands frozen at 2:13. Henry sat beside it, polishing a small silver key. He told me, almost whispering, "It's been quiet for 3 nights now. Maybe it's finally done waiting." But as the town bells struck midnight, a faint sound rose through the air. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The clock began to move. Henry dropped the key, his breath caught, and then came it, 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, from inside the shop. Henry turned to me, terrified. "He's early." The hands of the clock began to spin backward, faster and faster, the pendulum swinging like a heartbeat in reverse. The chime rang once, twice, 13 times, and then silence. When I found the courage to look up, Henry was gone. Only his glasses remained on the stool. But the clock's glass door had fogged from the inside, and on it, a handprint. The clock still sits there now, in the locked, abandoned Marin Clockworks. And every year, on the anniversary of Henry's death, the townsfolk swear they hear it chime 13 times at 2:13 a.m. Sometimes, people walking by claim to see a shadow in the window, an old man winding a clock, waiting for it to stop. If you ever hear a clock ticking when it shouldn't, don't check the time, because it might not be keeping time for you. It might be counting down. Episode 4. The Lantern Man. Every town has its ghost story, but in Ash Grove they don't tell theirs out loud. Because if you say his name after midnight, he might hear you. And if he hears you, he'll show you the way. They call him the Lantern Man, a wanderer who walks the old logging roads when the fog rolls in from the river. He carries a single lantern, its flame the color of dying embers. Some say he's a lost traveler. Others say he's a guide for the dead. But everyone agrees on one thing. If you follow his light, you never come back. I first heard of him from a police report dated October 1968. 3 teenagers vanished while driving home from a Halloween party. Witnesses said the fog was so thick that night, you could barely see your own hands. The next morning, the police found their car on the side of the old mill road. Doors open, engine still running, headlights pointing straight into the woods. And in the fog, they saw footprints. 3 sets leading away from the car, and one more coming toward it. Boot prints, large, heavy, and burned into the dirt, like the ground itself had been scorched where he walked. They never found the kids. But a month later, a hiker reported seeing 3 lights moving deep in the forest, each one flickering like a lantern in the mist. When he called out, all 3 turned toward him at once, and then went out. Years passed. Ash Grove's sawmill closed and the town faded into silence. But the fog still came, and sometimes, late at night, someone would knock on a door, saying they'd seen a man walking the ridge, swinging a lantern, humming something soft, a tune no one could quite remember. I went there last winter. The air was colder than it should have been, and the river was swollen with black water. I parked near the bridge where most sightings occurred and waited with my recorder. The fog came around midnight, thick as smoke curling over the road, and then a light. At first it was faint, barely visible through the haze, but it was moving, slowly, steadily, closer. I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" No answer. The light swayed once, then again, like someone was waving it to me. I should have left, but curiosity is a sickness I keep feeding, so I walked. The closer I got, the warmer the air felt. The fog turned gold around the edges of the light, and I began to hear something. A low hum, almost a lullaby. It was the kind of sound that makes you forget you're supposed to be afraid. Then the figure appeared. Tall, thin, wrapped in a coat that seemed to move on its own. The lantern hung from one hand, and the flame inside didn't flicker, didn't move. It watched. He turned toward me. I couldn't see his face, just the reflection of the lantern in the wet ground beneath him. And behind that reflection, 3 other shadows, standing perfectly still. He spoke softly, "You shouldn't be here." I asked him who he was. He tilted his head, and the flame dimmed, as if taking a breath. "You called me." Then the lantern went out. The world disappeared. I could still hear him walking, each step echoing behind me. Closer, closer, until I felt the heat of the lantern on my back. Then silence. When I came to, it was dawn. My car was covered in frost and the recorder was still running. But the last thing on the tape wasn't my voice. It was humming, that same low, endless tune. And at the end, a whisper right beside the mic. "Your turn to hold the light." They say the Lantern Man doesn't haunt the dead. He recruits them. Every light you see in the fog is someone who followed him once and never found their way back. So if you ever drive through Ash Grove on a foggy night and see a single lonely lantern glowing by the road, don't stop. Because if you do, you'll find that the light is moving closer, and it's humming your song. Episode 5, The Whispering Station. There used to be a train line that ran through the mountains between Briar Hollow and Coldwater Creek. It was shut down in the late 1950s after a landslide buried part of the track. The company dismantled the rails, sold the cars, and sealed the tunnels. But locals still swear that on certain foggy nights, you can hear the whistle, long, low, and mournful, echoing through the valley. They call it the Whispering Station, because when you hear that sound, you can also hear voices, as if hundreds of people are murmuring from somewhere deep underground. The story goes back to November 2nd, 1957, the night of the accident. Train 113 was scheduled for a midnight run to Coldwater. It never made it. A rock slide crushed the engine just outside Mile Tunnel 9, trapping everyone inside. 37 people died before rescuers even reached the site. The tunnel was sealed the next day. But that's not the strange part. A week later, a signalman working at the next station reported receiving a message through the telegraph line. A message from Train 113. It simply said, "Running late. Hold the line." The message was time-stamped 12:04 a.m., exactly 1 week after the crash. The telegraph had been disconnected since the day of the accident. They tore it down after that, but people still heard it. The faint clicking of Morse code in the dead of night. And sometimes, when the wind blew through the old tunnels, it carried something that sounded like a voice calling for help. I went to Coldwater Creek last year to see for myself. The tracks are gone now, just a gravel trail cutting through the woods. But the old station still stands. The roof has caved in, and the clock on the platform is forever stuck at 12:04. Inside, the air smells of rust and wet wood. There's an old timetable nailed to the wall, listing departures that haven't happened in 70 years. The last one reads, Train 113, departure, 11:47 p.m., arrival, pending. I set up my recorder and waited. The fog rolled in just before midnight, and with it came that sound, a distant whistle, soft and broken, like wind through a hollow bone. Then the rails began to hum. Even though they were long gone, the gravel beneath my feet vibrated, as if something massive were approaching. And then I saw it, a light at the far end of the valley. It wasn't bright, more like the glow of a lantern behind frosted glass. But it moved steadily, and soon I could make out the shape of a train. Old, black, covered in soot. Yet completely silent. It glided toward the platform without a sound and stopped right in front of me. The doors opened. No one came out, but I could see them inside, passengers sitting upright in their seats, faces pale and still, eyes staring through the glass. Their lips moved slowly, murmuring words I couldn't hear. The conductor stood at the end of the car, lantern in hand. His face was hidden by shadow, but I saw his mouth move. Next stop, Coldwater. Then he looked at me and smiled. I stepped back, but the ground behind me wasn't there anymore. The platform was gone, only blackness stretching like a tunnel beneath my feet. He raised his hand, gesturing for me to board. You're right on time. I blinked, and the light vanished. No train, no tracks. Only fog and the ticking of that broken clock. 12:04, 12:04, 12:04. When I played the recording later, there was nothing but static until the very end. A faint sound buried deep in the noise, a train whistle. Then a voice, whispering right into the mic. Hold the line. They say if you go to the old Coldwater station at midnight and stand where the tracks used to be, you might feel the ground tremble beneath your feet. That's not your imagination. That's Train 113, still running its route through the dark, never reaching its destination. And if you listen closely, you might hear the conductor calling your name. Episode 6, The Collector's Room. They say photography captures a moment in time, but what if it also captures the thing watching you? There's a small antique shop on the edge of Raven Hill, run by an old man named Harrow. He never advertises, yet somehow people always find their way there, especially photographers. Inside, the air smells like dust and chemicals, and the walls are covered with black and white portraits. Hundreds of them, each face looking just slightly off from the camera, as if they'd been distracted right before the shutter clicked. Locals call it the collector's room, because once your photo ends up there, you never leave it again. I went there last autumn after hearing rumors that Harrow used to be a war photographer. Some said he'd been to every battlefield since 1940, yet he never published a single picture. When I met him, he looked older than time. Thin hands, yellow eyes, voice like sand. He asked me one question before I even spoke. "Do you believe a picture can remember you?" I said I didn't know. He smiled, almost sad. That's the right answer. He led me into the back room. Dim light, rows of negatives hanging from the ceiling like strips of skin. And in the corner, a massive wooden camera carved with symbols I didn't recognize. It looked older than the shop itself. "Every soul," he said, "has a frequency, a pattern. This camera listens to it." Then he handed me an old Polaroid. "Take one picture, just one, but whatever you do, don't look away until it's done developing." I raised the camera. The click echoed too loudly for such a small room. The photograph slid out, slowly, trembling. The image began to form, my face half lit, standing by the wall of portraits. Then I noticed something. In the photo, the wall behind me wasn't the same. There were more pictures, dozens, and in every one of them a small figure stood watching from the corner. Same coat, same shape, always closer in each frame. I looked up. The real wall was still there, unchanged, but the air felt heavier. Behind me, one of the hanging negatives swayed, though there was no wind. "Who is that?" I asked. Harrow didn't answer. He just said, "You shouldn't have taken it with flash." The light bulb above me flickered, and for a second, the faces on the portraits moved, eyes twitching, mouths parting. A faint whisper rippled across the room, like 100 people breathing in unison. I turned toward Harrow, but he was gone. Only the old camera remained, its lens still open, pointed directly at me. The Polaroid in my hand grew warm. When I looked down, my reflection inside was gone, but the background had changed. I was now in the photograph wall, standing among the others, my face pale and still. Then the camera clicked again. No one was there to press the shutter. When I came to, I was outside, lying on the cold pavement in front of the shop. The windows were dark, boarded up, and the sign above the door read, "Closed since 1978. My Polaroid was gone. But my phone, which I had left recording, had a new picture in its gallery. It was me, standing inside that room, behind the glass wall, with hundreds of faces staring out beside me. And in the reflection of the camera lens, someone, or something, was still holding it. They say the collector's room still exists somewhere, but only appears to those who have lost something they shouldn't have photographed. Every image, every portrait, a soul that looked too long into the eye of the camera and never looked away again. So, next time you take a photo and see something unfamiliar standing behind you, don't delete it, because the moment you do, the camera might decide to keep you instead. Episode 7. The House That Remembers. Some houses have ghosts, others have memory, and memory can be worse. There's an old Victorian mansion on Elm Street, abandoned for decades. Locals call it the house that remembers. Every family that lived there vanished or left in terror. But the house didn't keep them alive. It kept their memories. Everything you did inside, everything you said, the house remembers. And it replays them, sometimes in ways you would never recognize. I came to Elm Street because of a letter. No return address, just my name, written in careful handwriting. Come see what you forgot. It's waiting for you inside. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood, mixed with something metallic. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, and the wallpaper peeled like dry skin. At first, nothing happened. I explored room by room. An old parlor, a long dining hall, bedrooms filled with broken furniture. Then I noticed it. Small things that weren't mine, but felt familiar. A teacup on a shelf I didn't remember placing. A coat hanging on a hook that looked exactly like one I had worn years ago. The mirror at the end of the hall reflected someone standing behind me, but when I spun around, no one was there. I found the library next, books stacked to the ceiling, and then I heard it. Whispers, faint at first, growing louder. Remember this? Remember that? The voice shifted. It wasn't one voice, it was many. My own voice, my mother's, my friends, all asking, accusing, mocking. I wanted to leave, but the door I came in from was gone. In its place, a wall, solid wood. Then I realized the floorboards weren't just groaning. They were moving, reshaping themselves like living veins of the house. The ceiling stretched higher, then lower. The hallway elongated until I was lost in the shape of memory itself. I stopped in front of a bedroom door. Inside, the room was my childhood bedroom. Everything perfectly preserved. The smell of my old sheets, the posters I had hung, the music I had loved. And on the bed, a note written in my own handwriting. You forgot me. You left me here. The whispers now surrounded me, not accusing anymore, demanding, pulling me toward the bed. I ran, down the hallway, the stairs, through rooms I didn't remember. The house changed behind me. Doors became walls, walls became doors, and in every reflection, mirrors, windows, even the shiny floor, I saw my own face, but older, paler, terrified. Finally, I stumbled outside. The morning fog swallowed the house whole. I thought I was safe, but when I looked back, the front door was open again, and a small, faint whisper carried through the wind. We remember you. They say the house doesn't want you dead. It only wants you to remember everything you tried to forget. Every secret, every regret, every sin stored in the walls, waiting for the next visitor. And if you ever walk past that Victorian mansion at night, you might hear whispers from inside. Not angry, not malicious, just remembering. Episode 8, The Forgotten Carnival. Every town has a place that doesn't exist on any map. In Hallow Ridge, it's a forest clearing called Whisper Grove. During the day, it's just trees and fog. But when the moon rises full, a carnival appears. Lights flicker on rusted rides. Music drifts through the mist. And the air smells like sugar, smoke, and something faintly metallic, like blood. They call it the Forgotten Carnival, because anyone who enters during the full moon never leaves. I first heard about it from a hiker named Elias. He said he had followed a fox into the forest one night and suddenly he was at the carnival. The rides moved on their own. The carousel horses galloped in place, their eyes glowing red. The Ferris wheel turned slowly, creaking, its cabins filled with shadowy figures.
It wasn't a dream,
Elias whispered. I heard the laughter. I heard the whispers. They called my name. He escaped, barely. By morning, the clearing was empty, and all traces of the carnival were gone. I went there last October, full moon overhead. The forest was silent, the fog thick. Then I saw it, a faint glow between the trees. Music, old carnival music, drifting on the wind. As I approached, the rides became clearer, rusty, decaying, but somehow alive. A clown with peeling makeup waved at me, his smile stretched too wide, eyes too dark. He whispered, "Welcome. You've been waiting." The tents were enormous. Inside, booths sold candy and trinkets, but the customers were pale, thin, almost translucent. They moved in slow, jerky motions, hands reaching out to touch me, but never quite making contact. I tried to leave, but the path back through the trees had vanished. Every direction I turned, I ended up back at the center. The music grew louder, filling my head, and the whispers joined in. Stay, play, don't leave. The carousel began to spin faster. The horses' mouths opened, screaming, but no sound came out. The Ferris wheel cabins swung down, and in each shadowy figure, I saw my own face, pale, terrified, screaming silently. A ride operator approached me, not human, not ghost. "You want to join?" he said. "It's fun. We never leave." The lights flickered, the music paused, and for a heartbeat, I saw the carnival without fog. The rides were made of bones and skin. The laughter was real screams, and the shadows were souls trapped for decades. I ran blindly through the tents, the fog twisting around me. Then, as I crashed into the clearing's edge, the carnival vanished. Only the forest remained, silent and dark. But in my pocket, a small ticket had appeared. Red ink. Admit 1. Next full moon. They say the forgotten carnival comes for those who wander too far, and those who answer its call. Every full moon it reappears. Every ride, every game. Every shadowy figure is someone who never left. If you ever hear music in the middle of the woods, or see lights flicker in the fog, don't follow it. Because once you do, the carnival remembers your name. And the next time the full moon rises, it will call you back. Episode 9. The Echoing Room. There's a small building on the outskirts of Graymore, an old abandoned sound studio. No one goes there, not even the local kids. They say it's cursed, not because of ghosts, but because it remembers every sound ever made inside. They call it the Echoing Room, because once a word enters, it never leaves. It comes back, repeated, twisted. I first heard about it from a sound engineer named Mara. She was hired to catalog old recordings left behind when the studio closed in 1983, but she warned me. Do not say a single thing when you're inside. The walls will listen, and they never forget. Curiosity got the better of me. I arrived one gray afternoon. The building was small, brick, unmarked. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. The control room had old mixing boards, reels of tape, microphones still standing. I stepped into the main recording room. Bare walls, wooden floor. And then I heard it, faintly at first, a whisper, a voice, repeating my name. Archivist, archivist. I froze. I hadn't said a word. The air felt thick, heavy, vibrating. Every sound I had made that day, footsteps, breath, even my heartbeat, had been absorbed by the room. And now, It was speaking. I tried to leave. The door slammed shut. Every word I had ever spoken, every lie, every secret, echoed from the walls, louder and louder. Voices I didn't recognize joined in. My father's, strangers, children laughing, crying. The sound became unbearable. I clutched my ears, but it didn't matter. The room had absorbed too much. It was feeding on memory, feeding on guilt, feeding on fear. Then I saw shadows moving along the walls. Not my shadow, others. Figures of people who had spoken in the room decades before, trapped in the echo, forever repeating the same syllables, the same mistakes. A tape recorder on the console clicked on by itself. The voice on it was mine, saying something I had never said aloud. And yet, there it was, captured, amplified. I shouldn't have come here. The walls vibrated. The voice grew stronger. I realized then the truth. The echoing room doesn't just remember words. It remembers the intent behind them. Your lies, your fears, your regrets. It plays them back in full, turning your own voice against you. I ran. I slammed against the door. It opened. I stumbled outside. Gray light, silence, empty streets. The building looked the same as before, but when I turned to look, the windows reflected hundreds of mouths moving silently, reciting words I had never wanted anyone to hear. They say the echoing room still stands, and anyone who steps inside risks having every word they've ever spoken, or not spoken, played back at them. Some leave terrified, some never leave at all, because sound is a memory, and memory can be eternal. Episode 10, The Last Tape. They say all stories have an ending, but some endings aren't really endings. I found the tape in a box, unmarked, buried under old reels in my studio. No label, no note, just a single reel marked, "Play Me." The moment I pressed play, I heard a voice, my voice, but older, tired, echoing through time. If you're hearing this, you've already opened the box. I froze. The voice continued. Everything you've listened to, every story, every warning, came from me. Me in the future. Me sending these messages back through time. All the houses, the carnival, the room, the photographs, they exist because I made them exist, to lead you here. The tape hissed and warped. The voice multiplied. It was me, my younger self, my older self, myself I hadn't met yet, all speaking at once. You are the archivist now. Every story you followed, every tale you've heard, is part of you, and part of me, and part of the world that will come after us. Suddenly, the studio shifted. Walls of the room dissolved. I was back in every place I had visited in the stories. The Marionette's Theater, Harrow's Collector Room, the House That Remembers, the Forgotten Carnival, the Echoing Room. And in each place I saw myself, watching, listening, learning, trapped in the story, but also shaping it. The voice whispered one last time, "This is how it works." The archivist receives the message. The archivist becomes the messenger. And if you are hearing this, you are already part of it. The tape ended. The silence was heavier than any sound, and I understood. I wasn't just a listener. I was the story, and the story would never end. They say that if you ever find a strange reel, a box of tapes, a forgotten recording, and you play it, the voice you hear might not belong to you yet. It might belong to your future self. Because in the archivist's world, all stories are connected, all listeners are participants, and every ending is only the beginning of another story. This is where the series ends. The box is closed, but the story continues in anyone who dares to listen.